Greetings and a good morning to you. I think we're waiting for a few more people to join, but I'm delighted to be here and I'm thankful for all of you who have made the time to be here. I know it's early in the day for many of you. Some of you, it's probably just at the break of dawn. Uh, and so I'm thankful that you've taken the time to be here. Just seeing some of the messages coming through on the chat channel. So I want to encourage you to use that. Uh, Use that to post any questions you have and any comments you have, anything that you like. And I want to just also encourage you after we finish today's session, you're more than welcome not only to use this material, but I want to encourage you to maybe even have others use the YouTube Spiritual Leadership YouTube channel and listening to some of the sessions that we've already covered. So in the interest of time, I'd probably like to get started and just get on. I wanted to cover off quite a bit today, and then I have some instructions as we get towards the end of this time with regards to some additional things that I've been able to plan for missionaries that are involved with the Asian Baptist Clearinghouse. So I look forward to sharing some of those updates with you that I've been able to speak to Pastor Bayer about. I'm thankful to him for his help, even in just arranging this, facilitating this, and it's been my privilege to be able to teach over the last 4 weeks. So, as we get into today's session, I wanted to speak about embracing uncertainties. COVID-19 at some stage will pass. It is unfortunate to think about the level of human loss, the loss of life, the impact to families. But even beyond that, as we think back and look back on this time, and we not only look at the amount of pain of mind and loss that people and families have encountered, we will be able to look back on this time as a time that distinctly impacted global economies. It also will be a time that we will be able to look back and see that it's one that's impacted how we even conduct ourselves individually as leaders, how we managed our ministries or be it our businesses. So as we learn from this time, the one thing that we can pick up is that uncertain times come to us in different forms. And it can impact us very, very differently. I want you to think with me, because all of you travel, no doubt, often. Think with me as you go to the airport with your family to take a trip that you want to take to the mission field or back home, whatever the case may be. And as you get to the airport, you get to the counter, you check in, you check your bags through, you go over to the gate, and now you're waiting. And as you're waiting there, you've been made to understand there potentially is a delay. And now you start getting a little anxious, wanting to understand, what does this delay mean? How long is it going to last? What does this mean with regards to maybe a connecting flight that I have? And you wait, and you wait, and as time passes by, you get a little more anxious. And then you start getting nervous. You want to walk over to the counter and ask the person at the counter as to, what this is all about. You're looking at the sign there to see if there is a new time that's going to be reflected there. And the waiting makes you anxious because you're in a place of unknown. and you don't know what the outcome is going to be, and you don't know what the impact is going to be. And very often, as you wait in that anxiety, in that moment of anxiety, you look for either an announcement over the airways that says, look, your flight has been rescheduled and it's going to now definitely kind of depart from this at this particular time. And and the moment you find out, what happens, it takes you out of that place of unknown and uncertainties. And now you start very quickly planning. You're going to miss your connecting flight. So you go to the counter, you look at what the options are, and you start dealing with this unfortunate situation. And that is so true in any crisis. Once we know exactly what's going to happen, we're all very good at being able to plan what needs to get done. But it's in those times of uncertainties, we find that we sometimes get paralyzed. So I want to talk to you in the first half of this session as to how do you deal with uncertainties? What happens when we go through such times, whether that be a personal tragedy and some uncertainties around, let's say, our health. It could be some uncertainties with regards to the financials of how you're going to be able to maybe pay your rent and some fees and some transportation costs and visa costs. So it could be financial and you're living in a place of unknown. Or it could be something that involves your family, or it could be something that's even far greater than that. But what happens when we find ourselves in such times of anxiety and uncertainty is that we get anxious. Anxiety sets in. But the first thing that happens in a time of uncertainty takes us out as what I would call automatic. Because the reality is that we all become creatures of habit. And we all get into a routine. We wake up at the same time. We go through all of our morning chores in the same way. We have a routine for our days from Monday all the way through to Sunday and back again. And we have habits. We've got schedules. We have a routine. And we have order. We have structure. And that's natural, because we all want to live in a place of predictability. Right? We know that's how we want, and we want that certainty. But what happens in a crisis, just like what happened through COVID-19, it wakes us up because the automatic is disrupted. We suddenly find ourselves in a place that we're not very familiar with, because as you look back now and you think back on those early few weeks, you had to be home, you had to think about how you connected with your church family and others over phones and WhatsApp and Viber and Zoom or whatever it be. You looked for alternatives because the automatic had been disrupted. And a crisis wakes us up because all of those things have changed. And sometimes in these moments of uncertainty and crisis, we fail to maximize on the opportunity because of two things. First is a lack of awareness of what's happening, because we haven't processed quickly enough all of what possibly could go wrong and things that could happen. So that's the first thing, the lack of awareness. The second is there is a lack of intentionality. You can't assume that things will happen. You're not going to wake up one morning and say, oh, today I'm going to just watch and wait and see, and I'm going to have the best day. That's not going to happen. Because unless you plan and unless you're intentional, you will not maximize the opportunities that are ahead of you. And so a crisis and an uncertain time takes us out of, as I said, what I called automatic. I'd like to give you an example from my own life. Back in 2015, I was actually, I'd gone to work. Prior to work, I was in a gym just doing my morning exercise, and I didn't feel quite right. And if I fast forward, what happened was I had a massive heart attack, and I ended up in hospital. And it's amazing as to what happens when you think that you have all of life ahead of you and life will continue on, and you plan and prepare and you've got a whole host of things to do. And suddenly you find yourself, like I did on that hospital bed, thankful that you have made it by the grace and the providence of God. Because I was so fortunate, because I was in the middle of a heart attack, and what had happened was I had a rupture in my main artery, and they had 55 minutes to restore supply. And the clock was ticking. And by the grace of God, there was a cardiologist, there was a theater that was free, and they rushed me in before even registering and did what they needed to. And God brought me through that time. But when you go through a time like that, like I did, it stops you and it gets you to think. And that's what happened to me. Because I suddenly realized, look, I don't know how much time I have. And therefore, I've got to live life in the today. That means I've got to think about what my purpose is. And I want to make sure that I'm living my purpose to the best that I can every day. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, even with you, because I want to make each day of my life count. But that happened because my automatic was stopped on that day, and I had to rethink of what my purpose was, what my priorities were, and how I was going to live each day. And so a crisis does that to all of us. And given the opportunity, I'm again sure that you will have some personal stories that you would be able to share along those themes. But when uncertainties come, we've got to learn to adapt very quickly to the uncertain environment. But we've got to be mindful that we are continuing to live in these uncertain times, not forgetting our vision and not forgetting our values. But we've got to, around that, think about how we would operate. I'm not sure how you chose to operate when COVID-19 set in. But for me, I changed the way I even managed the businesses that I was looking after. It was not about what we would do in 2020 in the calendar year, but my planning became more focused around how do I think about this week? How do I steer my people through this week to get to an objective? And then the next week, and the next week, and the week after that. So we've got to get a lot closer and manage smaller components of time. And so I would encourage you, as you think about getting back into your areas of ministries, as they resume, don't forget that we're still going through uncertain times. And therefore, I would encourage you, whilst planning for the big picture, I want to encourage you to think about how you build your people back to where you would want to get them 1 week at a time, and taking those small steps in the path that you want to take them through. So that's the first thing I want us to keep in mind today, that uncertainties, what happens in uncertainties is that the first is that it takes us out of the automatic. The second is what I just touched on is that it requires a focus on today. It requires us to focus on today, because sometimes the people that we're leading are not able to process the longer term and the big picture. They're just looking by to say, how do I get through today? So we've got to ask ourselves, as I said last week, the questions that are relevant to today. In other words, those questions should be, how should I live today? How should I lead today? And then at the end of the day, the reflective questions on how did I lead today, and how did I live today? And those must become some paramount things that we've got to keep in mind. Because as far as yesterday is concerned, in a crisis, it's history. We want to make sure we've learned from yesterday and of some things that we need to do today, but we've got to live in the moment. So that's the second aspect that I want us to keep in mind, that what happens in a crisis is, first, is that it takes us out of the automatic. The second is that it requires us to focus on today. But here's the third, very important. A crisis or uncertainties and uncertain times in our life reintroduces us to humility. It reintroduces us to humility. Maybe you're better than me, but it is so easy for me to become self-dependent. And as a result of becoming self-dependent, become self-confident. In other words, confident in my own self. And soon, if we are not careful, whether it be in business, whether it be in life, whether it be in ministry, we can actually become and conduct ourselves like CEOs. And we can run our ministries and our work just depending on ourselves. And what that does is it just then creates in us the confidence that this is all about me. But humility is not thinking less of ourselves, because you are a person of value, and you want to keep that in mind, because you're a person of value in the sight of God. God has entrusted you with some gifts and abilities, and He's placed you in a place of leadership. So you are a person of value. And so humility is not thinking less about yourself. But here's the play on words. It's about thinking less about you and more about others. Sometimes our days are consumed and our time is consumed in thinking about ourselves. How should I look? How did I come out of this? How do I make myself as somebody that is indispensable? That's got nothing to do with your value. That's all about wrong expectations and mindset. And as I said, I'm guilty of this, because I can easily fall into this trap and come to believe that it's about my thinking, it's about my knowledge, it's about my importance more than the importance of others. You may recall last week I talked about the difference between success and significance. Success is all about us. And when we think more about ourselves, we're focused on the success side. But if we think more about others, then we are on the right pathway of wanting our lives to be significant. So humility is important, because when we are more humble, we are more approachable. I'm mindful always, and today I'm speaking to you, as I said right at the beginning, I'm speaking to you as though I'm sitting across the table from you and speaking to you one-on-one and pouring out into your life, some lessons that I've learned. And I have to be careful that I don't come across as someone that's got it all worked out. Because the moment I think and act that way, I become as someone that's unrelatable, because you'll be sitting there and saying, how do I get past my struggles? How do I get past my failures? And the reality is that we all fail. The reality is that we all attempt to do some things that don't work out. But the goal, as I said, is to learn from those times. There's a great book you can read. Sometimes you win, sometimes you learn. It's not about sometimes you lose, it's about learning. And so when we are transparent and we see that, we allow other people to see that we're just like them, we become more relatable. I think of Mordecai and I think of Haman in the Bible. Here is an individual, no doubt, who was a leader. And he was no doubt a leader that had great potential. But his potential and his past success made him a proud individual. And finally, his pride made him resent those that were around him that he thought should have respected him but weren't giving him the respect like Mordecai. And that pride ate so much into him that it made him blind to what was going on around him. And there was a significant cost that Haman paid. In fact, it cost him his position, it cost him his life, it cost him his 10 children, it cost the life of 800 other people. And by the way, there were 75,000 other people in the province that lost their life. All because of one individual who struggled with pride. And a good thing about a crisis is that it gives us an opportunity to normalize and realize that we're out of control. And there's no way that I can have confidence in my own self. And what it does is it turns us back to God and recognizing that it's He who is sovereign and it is He who steers our ship and brings us through troubled times. I was reading this morning from Psalm 107. You can make a note of it and then look at it in your personal time. And there are two verses there that describe what trouble could be like. It's in verse 26 and verse 27 of Psalm 107. It compares it to us being in the ocean and in the rough waves, where trouble can actually take you up and down, and it's just you're tossed about. It then talks about, there's a word there that's used as to how it can melt us. Verse 27 talks about how it then causes us to reel. It then causes us to stagger. And finally, it can bring us, as that verse describes, to our wits' end. That's what trouble can do to us. And when it does, it can take us from a place of pride and arrogance and self-confidence and bring us to a place where we have no place to look but up. And the following verses talk about how God is able to bring about what He desires out of those times. And He can bring us to calmer waters. He can still the storm. He can bring us to our desired haven. That's what God's able to do. But I'm sharing that with you because you're going to come up and come across people when you get back to your normal who think they've mastered the storm, who think they've learned it all during this time. And you're going to have to deal with them. But you're also going to come across people that are broken and shattered and are tossed about and are reeling. And for you to help them, a good way for you to do that is to be able to allow them to relate to you and to show that you've been shaken during this time. And when they see that, it'll help them relate to you a lot better. So that's the third aspect I want you to keep in mind. The fourth is something that I've already touched on, but I want to touch on again, because as we think about uncertainties and what that does and what it can do, is that it requires us to be creative. I cannot state this enough. You have to believe that there is an answer to all of those things which may seem impossible and unsolvable that you're going to come up with. You've got to believe there's an answer. And so therefore, there must be resilience, there must be tenacity, and if those are there, with the help of God, we will come through these times. Resilience, I like to think about it. I'm sure you've seen those bouncing castles that they build, and then they have those little they've got air sucked in them, and these tall images that kind of float around and move around in the wind. And even if you push them down, they kind of bounce back up. They're like a punching bag. That's what I think about when I think of the word resilience. And I want to encourage you to be resilient. That's what separates the players from the pretenders. By the way, that's what also separates the prayers, as you call it, prayers, from the pretenders, because it's our prayer and our communion with the Lord that will make us resilient and ready to face the uncertainties of the day. But even in life, I want you to be like someone that is represented by that punching bag. People, circumstances may knock you back, but you'll bounce right back, because your people need to see that you're that kind of an example so that they can even emulate you. It reveals our consistency. We've got to be resilient and reveal and be consistent during that time, so that we do what we said we were going to do. So a good way to think about it is a tip that I want to leave with you. As you think about planning your ministries, I want to encourage you to plan for just 100 days. Here's the next 100 days. Here's what we're going to do. But in these 100 days, here's what I'm going to do with regards to our ministries. But here's what I'm also going to do to build things that I'm going to work on in the next 100 days to build for the next 100 days that are coming after. So you're focusing your time frame on the things that you've got to do today, but you're also focusing a portion of your time in preparing for the next 3 months and the 6 months after that that come after. So that's a good way for you to think about how you kind of prepare and plan to come out. Because the reality is that I'm sure you've heard the expression that we've got to all think outside the box, right? I'm sure you've heard that before. The reality is when a crisis takes place, there is no box. You suddenly find yourself in a place that you've never been before. So we've got to think about alternatives and opportunities, and as you lead, be an example that's able to teach from that perspective. Let me give you another example. Most of you had registered to come for Spiritual Leadership Asia 2019. Pastor Bai will tell you, along with the other pastors, Pastor Nable and others, how we were planning for that. But as it got closer to the conference, we had to take a call of whether we were going to cancel the conference or go ahead with the planning. And at that stage, things in the Philippines seemed quite normal. And every indication was that, look, if we continued on, we would be able to have the conference without a problem. But as we prayed about it, as we sought counsel, and we looked at what was happening on a global perspective, and some indications of what we saw brought about some threat and uncertainty. And we made the decision to postpone the conference. And as we planned on doing that, communicating that, You saw what happened just the week that the conference was to be, is when pretty much the world went into lockdown, and people, even who had come into the Philippines, had to frantically try to leave the country so that they could get back home. But what happened in the times following that is, rather than look at all of the, we were quite sad that the conferences had to be postponed, because all of us put so much work into it. We were looking forward to seeing you, and we were looking forward to having that auditorium filled with over 6,000 people, and excited about what the Lord would do. But the Lord, in His sovereignty, directed us otherwise. But rather than sit still, what we did during the week of the conference very quickly was to say, look, that region is still in great need of laborers in the harvest. That region still has some significant challenges, which are now propelled further by by COVID-19, and the whole world was in a crisis. And so what we did during that week was we encouraged God's people from around the world to dedicate that week to pray for the 1040 region. We had thousands that signed up saying that they were going to pray for the region. And I had missionary friends tell me that as a result of that time of prayer, what God would do in this region potentially could be far greater to what God would have done through a conference. And so I want to encourage you, when things don't work out the way you want them to work out, always look at what the other options are. And there will always be alternatives and options that you could look at. I'm excited, starting the week of 24th August, we're going to have all of those conference preachers on the same Spiritual Leadership Asia YouTube channel, have 2 preaching sessions every week that you and thousands of others that had registered for the conference. But by the way, even beyond that, thousands and thousands of others that had or would not have been able to come for the conference, come on board and listen and benefit from the preaching that we would see. So those are some exciting things that are happening. The prayer week, this online, starting the week of August 24th, are things that we would not have done if not for the fact that this crisis and these uncertain times has altered our thinking. 5th, uncertain times and crisis, it tests our words and our actions. It tests our words and our actions. As someone said, you cannot doubt in the dark what you have seen in the light. I want to rephrase that a little bit. We cannot act different in dark times in contrast or contrary to what we have said in the light. And so, as we have portrayed ourselves to be leaders of value, who hold values, who walk according to the truth of God's word, and hold on to the promises of God's word, our actions, when we are going through uncertain times, must be consistent. And so we must live lives that are examples of our words. And I want to encourage you to lead from the front in this manner as you come out, and let there be consistency in what we do and what we have said, because it is that consistency that gives us a moral authority even to lead. So very quickly, I want to actually share with you 8 things that those that will be following you as you come out of this crisis will be looking for in you and in all of us as leaders. First, they're looking for continued hope. So we've got to keep in mind that we've got to define reality, as I've always said, but you have to inspire hope. Only defining reality, but not inspiring hope, leaves people vulnerable and in a place of uncertainty. But you've got to point them back to the truth of God's word, and that's where our ultimate hope is. But you've got to inspire that hope in them. So you've got to be mindful of that. The second is, because that's what they're looking for, the second is our followers are looking for us to show grace and compassion, because not everybody moves at the same speed. Most of us are not at our best during a time of stress and strain, and most of your people aren't. And so this is a time for you to extend care. And as I said, not last week, but the week prior to that, whilst we want to be striving, this is a time to be striding. And in other words, you're coming alongside people and you're putting them by the hand and guiding them along. And you've got to lead them through the change. Third, we've got to display thoughtfulness. What I mean by that is that we've got to become better listeners. We've got to clarify what people are saying and make sure that we are understanding what exactly they're saying and not miss what they're saying or saying between the lines. And we've got to reflect on what they are saying in order to be able to help them. So be thoughtful in that sense. Be a good listener at this time, because that's what people are looking for. I was speaking to a missionary in Argentina just this past Saturday. I spent over an hour with him on the phone. All I did probably during the call was ask 4 questions. And I just let him talk and listened, because people want somebody to listen to. And they are looking for someone who will listen, who can actually help them. And you are someone that can help them as a leader. So be thoughtful and a good listener. Fourth, be calm. We've got to, as leaders, maintain composure. As I've said before, calm is contagious. But if we are people that get, easily excited and we become very reactionary, then we can actually mislead people rather than lead people. As I said before, we want to be people that are reflecting and acting rather than people that are reacting. So I want to urge you to be calm, because that's the world, that's what your followers are waiting for. 5, communicate clearly. And as you're communicating, I'll talk a little more about this before the end of the session. Keep in mind who you're communicating, relate to them at their level, and talk about the things that are important to them. The story is told of a gentleman that had the opportunity to meet with the British Prime Minister and the Israeli Prime Minister. And at the end of that meeting, somebody, the interviewer, asked the person, "What did you think about both of them?" And he said, "Well, the British Prime Minister, as I spoke to him, I was reminded about what a great person he is. But as I spoke to the Israeli Prime Minister, in how we communicate, people are looking for, not to find out what a great leader you are and what a great leader I am, but people are looking for somebody that can come by their side and make them realize their worth, their potential, what's possible in their world, and make them be people that have hope and have someone that can help them along that pathway. And that's what you can be. 6, be trustworthy. I've touched on this before. Say what you say and do what you say you will do. Be a man or or a woman of your word. In other words, be reliable, build your credibility by being reliable. So be trustworthy. The next, a slight variation, be real, as we spoke about. As I said, if there are two people in the room and one of them is not you, if there's two of you in the room and one of them is not you, then one of them is not real. Right? So be real and focus on being real. In other words, be authentic and be sincere. I would encourage you to do that. 8, help them rebuild. And that should be our mindset as we come out of this. Not about just rebuilding our ministries, because how we rebuild our ministry is by rebuilding the people. In other words, instill confidence in them, as I mentioned, help them get small wins along the way, right? Just tell them, look, why don't you plan on doing this today? And give them some simple steps to take that they recognize that as they do it, that they are able to get beyond where they are today. And recognize and thank them as you kind of give them stuff, as you give them things to do. You know, leading volunteers is never an easy task, but leading them through such a time is when you will be able to build the biggest loyalty, because this is when they want a leader to come by their side. So finally, as we get towards the end of session 4, I want to very quickly give you some principles of leadership that I want you to keep in mind. You know, what happens in a crisis is that our normal road and our pathway is blocked. And many of us and all of us have had to take detours in life and detours in how we manage ministry. If you think about a puzzle, and in fact, my children bought a 1,000-word puzzle the other day that they are trying to put together. What they do is they keep the cover, which is the picture, in front of you. And then you look at that picture to put the puzzle together. What happens in a crisis is that you have the same puzzle, but no picture. And you've got no frame of reference. There's no playbook. There's no manual. I'm sure you were never taught how to deal with these past 3 months as you went through Bible college and institute. You weren't taught this. You had to figure this one out by yourself in the place that you're serving on a day-to-day basis. And you had to learn and lead. And that's what this time has been. And as you're thinking about such times, a good way to think about it is the next step. Because when we do take the next step in a crisis, the step after that becomes a little clearer. And the step after that becomes a little clearer. And that's a good way for us to manage in a crisis. So I want to encourage you to think about the journey ahead in very, very small steps that you can take and you can help others along. So what have we learned about a crisis and the trials that come into our life? We've said a crisis moves us. We're never the same after that. It can move us positively. It can move us back. It can, there can be negative things that come out of it. But I've encouraged you to stay in control through that time. So the first is it moves us. The second, we talked about this, that it reveals real leaders. In other words, it shows us up. It shows up our leadership. And finally, it tests our confidence. And we've talked about that today. And we've talked about how we need to be adaptable. In other words, we've got to quickly adjust to the things that need to be adjusted as we come through this. So as we move towards the finish of this session, I want to leave you with some thoughts on how to lead during such times. How to lead during such times. The first I want you to think about is to understand context. In other words, I want to encourage you to be a contextual leader. What do I mean by that? I want you to think about three A's if you are able to write this down. The first is, if you want to be contextual and be aware of what's happening around you, is that you've got to be awareness is a critical component. You've got to be aware of all of the aspects around you and that affect your ministry. You've got to be aware of what the government is saying, your local community is saying, what the people are saying, what the church families are saying. All of those things are things that you've got to be aware of. So awareness is critical. The second is, in order to be a contextual leader, you must be a leader that anticipates. In other words, you must be intuitive, and you've got to be aware of how critical timing is. So you must be someone that anticipates. And you may recall I said a leader is someone who sees more and sees it before. In other words, he sees it before the other people. So you should be seeing things that are potentially likely to happen, that are potential opportunities or potential dangers ahead of your people. And so you've got to anticipate, and you've got to be intuitive, and you've got to be aware of timing and make sure that you're responding. The third is, as then you're responding, the third A is that you are agile. In other words, you're able to change very quickly. You're able to adapt very quickly. So awareness, anticipation, and agility are critical. It doesn't matter whether you're running a Fortune 500 company or whether you're running a church ministry. They're critical for all of us. I was in another leadership call earlier today with a business, and I was telling them the same thing. In a crisis, we've got to learn to prioritize. And as I shared with you, as you prioritize, you've got to be able to separate between conflicting priorities and competing priorities. We've got to be mindful of things that we want to pause, and we've got to be mindful of things that we want to very quickly pivot to. So all of those three P's are quite critical. So the first is to be a contextual leader. Then you've got to be, your awareness, your anticipation, and agility are critical. I was reading a story of how the F-16 pilots are trained, and it talks about how when they get into battle where there are anti-aircraft guns at the bottom that could shoot up and destroy them, or they could have enemy aircrafts that are flying around them and they could be attacked from down ground on the ground or any side. They are taught something on they're taught on how they should think and act during such times. And if you have a paper and pen, write this down. They're taught about what they call the OODA moments. OODA. The first O means observe. In other words, you've got to very quickly observe what's happening around you and what's changing around you, for the good or for bad. The second O means you've got to think about all of your options. And as I shared last week, that is so critical that you as a leader do always look at options and ask questions from people around you to get their thoughts, to be able to get all of the options. The third then is D, the letter D, which is you've got to decide. You've observed, you've looked at options, and now you've got to decide, and you made a decision. If you have only done those three things and you stop, that could be a matter of life or death for you. In other words, that would have, even if you had decided and stopped, it could spell danger and disaster. If you have not done, which is the last portion of that, and that is the A. And A there means action. You have to act on that decision. And so I want you to think about how you prepare yourself as you think about being contextual leader, it simply means that you are aware. In other words, you're observing, you're looking at all the options, you're deciding on the course of options. You've involved others in in exploring all the options, and now you've got to make a decision as a leader. And then finally, you've got to act on it, because if you don't, you would have missed out. So that's the first truth that I want to leave with you. As you lead, be a contextual leader. The second is, I want to encourage you to be a leader, and I want to encourage you to lead based on your values and on what God has impressed upon your heart, and not based on external pressure. Never lead based on the pressure that is being put on you from the world outside or by even people that are close to you. Always lead on the basis of your convictions. And so don't let fear and unknown make your crisis worse. In other words, don't become, we're living in a dysfunctional world. And that's true. And you're seeing this displayed at this time frame more than ever before, because we're just coming out of COVID-19, and you've seen all what's happening in the news about diversity and all of those things. But if you think about it, today's values that people actually treasure seem to be comfort, control, entitlement, entertainment, personal happiness. Those are seemingly the values that most of the world, or a majority of the world, are kind of driven by. But as a leader, never forget, your values are actually your values from within. Your attitude, your integrity, your ethics, your accountability, your trust, you're putting others first, you're embracing the truth of God's word. Those are your values. And never ever let external pressure, whether that be through circumstances or people, alter that. That's the second truth I want to leave with you. The third, as I said before, I want to just speak for a moment on communicating. Be mindful how you communicate, and make sure that you communicate effectively. What do I mean by that? In other words, here are some things that I'm going to call out. Never shy away from defining reality. In other words, don't give people a false sense of security through your communication, but define reality, but then inspire hope, as we spoke about. The second is, I want to ask that you communicate frequently. Be transparent, be open in how you communicate. I've used the word before, communicate judiciously. In other words, be discerning who you're communicating to, and only communicate appropriately to that level, right? Give them what they can actually process, and don't give them more than what they can handle. Fourth, as part of how we communicate with care. Put personal thought into your communication, because you know that your communication can make or break other people. So put care into that. And always when you communicate from the perspective of we versus you. In other words, make it collaborative. And that way you will get people on board, because they feel part of what you're doing. And then, as I said earlier, communicate hope. So that's the third aspect. So be a contextual leader, lead based on values and not on pressure. Communicate clearly was what I want to leave you with. In other words, remember this: good leaders inspire confidence in the leader, but great leaders inspire confidence in the people themselves. I'm going to repeat that. Good leaders inspire confidence in themselves, but great leaders, in other words, those ones that are significant, or focused on significance. Great leaders inspire confidence in the people themselves, and that's what you want to do. Uh, 4, a crisis lead and into the creative zone. And what I wanted to impress upon you as I talked about this today is that there are good fears and there are bad fears. Good fears cause us to prepare, but bad fears can paralyze us. So we need to be mindful of that. And both of them are poles apart. So we've got to be careful that when we are even thinking through that, we are managing our managing where our thinking lands, and we are focusing in the zone that would help us to prepare and bring out the best and bring out the potential rather than paralyze and cripple us. We are faced with an incredible opportunity, as I said before, that's brilliantly disguised. And so we've got to ask ourselves some important questions. Every possibility is surrounded by the problem, like I've said before. And so we've got to ask ourselves, what good thing can come out of this? Is a great question to ask when you are in any crisis. What good thing can come out of this? And then what is it that I can learn from this? And it's a great discipline to write that down, because not only would it help you later, it can actually help you help other people. Number 5, very quickly, and I just want to mention this in passing, it's more true for the corporate world, but even in your area of ministry, think about how you can use some technology that you may have adapted, but think about how you can use it in a far greater sense than just serving your church community alone, or your people alone. 6, show humility and authenticity. We've touched on that already, but I can't leave you with these final moments without stating that again. Be humble so that you're approachable, and then be authentic so that you're real. 7, focus on constructive change. In other words, remove distractions. You remember what we spoke about? When crisis comes, it stops the traction of moving forward and it distracts us. And so we've got to get back now into taking out the distraction for our people and once again rebuilding traction. And we've got to lead that from the front. As I was thinking about, focus on constructive change, my mind went back to 1 Samuel chapter 22. And I'm going to come back to this towards the end of our study today. But in this portion of 1 Samuel 22, I want you to think about David in this cave with all of these people there. And in the cave are his household. He's got there men that the Bible classifies as men who are in distress, men that are disconnected, men that are in debt, men that are discontent. And I can tell you, as you come out as a leader back into your place of ministry, in your church, in your community, you will have all of these 4 types of people: people in distress, people that are disconnected, people in financial debt, and people that are discontent. You're going to come up with them. But what is possible is that you as a leader can take those same people and bring them on a journey just like David did, so that they can become your mighty men of valor in your ministry. And look at every person today that you come into contact with who looks like that and acts like that, and look at the potential that God sees in them and how God can use you as an instrument to bring them on that journey of transformation. And so as we finish today, I want to take the final 2 or 3 minutes to leave you with some things that I want to highlight. Remember the 3 questions I spoke to you about last week that people are always asking. The first is, will you lead me? In other words, they're asking, do you truly care for me? The second question they are going to ask you is, can you help me? In other words, they're going to ask you, can I have confidence? Can I trust you? And the third question they're going to ask you is, can I trust you? Because that's a character question. The second is a confidence question. And so you've got to demonstrate care, you've got to demonstrate confidence, and you have to demonstrate character. And if you do those three things, you will have people not just in your church, but people across your community today that would be willing to follow you. So stand up and be a leader is how I would want to encourage you. In other words, embrace a leadership mindset. Remember that you are a person of influence. Remember that you are a person that not just defines reality, but inspires hope. And make sure that you have the right attitude and the right heart to be able to be that leader and help other people. In order to, as you lead, I want to encourage you, be a visionary. This is a great opportunity because everything has been set even. And you have the opportunity to imagine possibilities and ensure that your people are committed to the journey and the vision that you have. Don't ask them, are you okay with this? That doesn't say anything. But ask them the question, look, are you committed to this vision that we've come up with? And then let them actually come with you on that journey. The third element as part of being a leader, the first is embrace a leadership mindset. Second is be a visionary and imagine possibilities. Third is build leaders around you. Those who want to, identify those who want to, and invest in them. Invest yourself in people that not just want to be a leader, but are willing to pay the price to be that leader. And then invest in them. And third is, in your own life, be willing to go beyond the average with them. And so I want to encourage you, fourth, as you look at building leaders, build relationships, because there is no greater way to lead, because nobody cares about a leader and says, follow me because I am the leader. That only works in the army. That's a great place to start as a positional leader, but it's never a place to stay, because you want to be a relationship leader where people follow you because of what you mean to them. I want you to think back on your schooling. Usually the subjects we enjoy were because of the teachers that we connected with. That's so true in life. The people that we get behind to support are people that we have a relationship with. So I want to encourage you to build relationships. Next, go beyond the average. I'll call this the Rebecca principle. Write that down. Because here was a young lady, when the servant came looking for a wife for Isaac, she, on her own accord, gave him water to drink. She filled the troughs for the camels to drink. And she was someone that was willing to go the second mile. And I want to encourage you to be a second mile leader. Can I tell you something? In fact, you will find very little traffic on that road because not too many people go down that road. But be a second mile leader. In other words, invest without thinking of a return. Invest without thinking of a return. And so in conclusions, I want to leave you with a quotation, something to remember, and a perspective. Here's the quotation. God doesn't give the toughest battles to his toughest soldiers, but he creates his toughest soldiers through life's toughest battles. I'm going to repeat that. God doesn't give the toughest battles to his toughest soldiers, but he creates his toughest soldiers through life's hardest battles. Make a note of that, because God's given you an opportunity and God's put you in a place of some tough battles because he wants to create in you a soldier that is well-pleasing to the Lord. Remember, the greatest opportunities that are ahead of you are brilliantly disguised as unsolvable problems So I want to always encourage you to believe that there is an answer. And if you believe that, you will keep looking and looking and looking till you find the answer. And so I want to leave you once again with the perspective. Remember, how you view things will result in how you do things. How you view things will result in how you do things. And so, as we finish today, I want to leave you with those thoughts. But I have some interesting news for you and some exciting news for you. I've been thinking about what Pastor Bayer asked me right at the beginning of this about being able to extend this. And what I'm delighted to share with you is that next week, we're going to position this session as a Zoom call. It's very easy. I'm going to send you the link the same way. All you've got to do is click on the link and follow what it tells you, and it'll open up a screen that will have a video. But the exciting part of that is it'll give us the opportunity to speak one-to-one. And I've thought over these last 4 weeks, and you've listened so graciously, but I want to make next week about a Q&A session. So I want to give you the opportunity to ask questions, real life questions that you're dealing with from a leadership perspective. And I'll do the best I can to answer them. If I don't have the answer, I assure you I will invest in finding the answer for you by speaking to others. So that's next week. The week after that, we will have another Zoom session, another YouTube session just like this. And I've invited Brother Kevin Folger, who's my colleague who is supporting Spiritual Leadership Asia for North America, to come and speak with you with regards to some things that the Lord's placed on his heart. That will be not next week, the week after. And in the final week, I've saved the best for the last. I've invited Pastor Chappell to come and speak exclusively to Asian Baptist Clearinghouse missionaries, just for you. Nobody else is invited for any of these meetings, just for you. And I've spoken to him. He's more than delighted to do that. And I wanted to let you know, but I want you to spread the words, because on those calls, I'd love to see all 200 Asian Baptist Clearinghouse missionaries on that call, so that you have the opportunity to hear firsthand from him some things that God is actually been teaching him that he'll want to share with you. And so I'm excited about this, that today is the last of the teaching sessions. Next week is a Zoom call where we will have a question and answer opportunity, and we can all learn together from that. And then we have 2 more YouTube sessions with Dr. Kevin Folger, and then finally, exclusively for ABC, Pastor Paul Chappell. So I'm excited. So with that, I'm going to finish today, and I look forward to staying in touch. I want to encourage you to have others visit this YouTube channel and visit and like it, so that we get our ratings up and get ranked up. But more than all of that, if you think this has been beneficial to you, encourage others to come and listen in, so that they too can come and learn. And as I've said before, if you have questions, please reach out to Pastor Bayer or to myself, and we'll be delighted to help you in any way we can. Thank you. Have a great day. And I've really enjoyed being a part of this, and having the privilege to teach you over these past 4 weeks. Thank you.